Rashid Al Nuaimi was the kind of father everyone admired, calm, successful, and devoted. But behind the marble walls of his Dubai villa, he was planning something unthinkable. The death of his own son, Kareem. What seemed like a tragic hiking accident would soon unravel into one of the city's most chilling crimes. A father's betrayal caught silently on CCTV in the glittering heart of Dubai's Al Barsha district stood a villa that looked like something out of a dream. Tall white pillars, trimmed gardens, and a driveway lined with expensive cars. Behind those golden gates lived Rashid Al Nuaimi, a man whose reputation was built on charm, confidence, and success. People spoke his name with admiration. He was known as a smart businessman, a devoted husband, and a loving father. To neighbors and friends, the Al Nuaimi family was the perfect example of how far ambition could take you in Dubai's fast-moving world. Rashid was 45, tall and elegant, with the calm smile of a man who always seemed in control. His wife Aisha ran a small art studio in Jumeirah, and together they had one child, 17-year-old Kareem. Rashid often said that his son was his pride, his reason for working so hard. Anyone who visited their home could see framed photos of Kareem everywhere. A smiling boy on a bicycle, a teenager holding a school trophy, a family portrait taken on a yacht. To outsiders, it was the image of happiness, but perfection is often a mask. Behind the marble floors and luxury furniture, there was a tension that grew heavier each day. Rashid's company, once one of the city's rising names in interior design, was falling apart. Unpaid loans, angry investors, and bad contracts had begun to crush him. He hid the truth from everyone, pretending that business was booming. Every morning he dressed in his white kandura, left home confidently, and told Aisha he had new projects lined up. In reality, he spent hours at cafes staring at his phone, avoiding calls from banks and clients. At night, when everyone slept, Rashid sat in his office surrounded by unpaid bills. His hands trembled as he looked at the red numbers on his computer screen. He thought about how much he had built, and how easily it was all slipping away. He couldn't face the shame of losing it. In Dubai, image was everything. A man could survive poverty, but not humiliation. Then came an idea, dark, absurd, but tempting. A few months earlier, Rashid had taken out a life insurance policy on his son, Kareem. It was a common investment strategy, something he had done as part of financial planning. The policy was large, worth millions, meant to secure Kareem's future if anything ever happened to Rashid. But as the pressure mounted, Rashid began looking at that policy differently. He read the fine print late one night. It would pay out in full if Kareem died in an accident. At first, he tried to push the thought away. It was monstrous, but desperation has a strange way of turning the impossible into logic. The more he thought about it, the more his fear began to twist into something colder, calculation. He convinced himself it was a sacrifice for the family, a way to protect his wife and save his name. Kareem, meanwhile, lived quietly in his own world. He was gentle, sensitive, and artistic, so unlike his father. While Rashid believed in business and power, Kareem found peace in small things. Sketching Dubai's skyline, taking photos of city lights at night, and spending hours editing them on his laptop. He didn't notice the distance growing between him and his father. Rashid rarely joined him for meals anymore, often locking himself in his study. When Kareem tried to share his new photos, his father barely looked up. Still, Kareem loved him deeply. He never knew that the man he admired was drowning in secret debt, planning something unthinkable. Rashid's once warm eyes had grown colder. Every time he looked at his son, a storm of guilt and greed battled inside him. But he had made up his mind. He began to research remote locations, cliffs, mountain trails, and viewpoints where accidents could happen without witnesses. One evening, while driving home from a failed business meeting, Rashid saw an online article about the mountain cliffs of Hatta, a quiet desert escape popular among hikers and photographers. The photos showed vast views, deep valleys, and narrow ledges. It looked peaceful, isolated, perfect. He bookmarked the page and whispered a prayer that no one could hear. To the world, Rashid Al Nuaimi was still the image of success, but inside him something had already broken. The man who once promised his son the world was now thinking of taking it away, and convincing himself that it was the only way to survive. The morning of the trip began with an unusual calm. The The sun had barely risen over the city skyline when Rashid walked into the kitchen, dressed neatly, holding a travel mug of coffee. He told his wife he wanted to take Kareem on a father-son outing, a small adventure before the boys' final exams began. It sounded like a sweet gesture. Aisha was delighted. She hadn't seen Rashid this relaxed in months. Kareem, still half asleep, smiled when he heard the plan. He had always wished for moments like these with his father. A day without pressure or arguments, just the two of them. Rashid had planned everything days in advance. The silver Range Rover was fueled and ready. He had packed snacks, water, and Kareem's camera bag. He made sure to leave early, claiming he wanted to avoid traffic. But in reality, he wanted to reach the cliffs before too many visitors arrived. As they drove out of the city, tall buildings gave way to the desert. The roads stretched endlessly, cutting through sand dunes and rugged hills. For the first time in a long while, they talked. Rashid asked Kareem about his studies, his photography, his plans for university. His voice was calm, even gentle. Kareem was surprised by his father's interest, unaware that behind those soft questions was a mind rehearsing the steps of a crime. Rashid's heart was heavy, but his thoughts were cold. He had convinced himself there was no turning back. He told himself that life insurance would save his family, that one tragic accident could fix everything. The guilt was buried deep under layers of rationalization. They reached Hatta by late morning. The weather was mild, the sky pale blue. The mountains rose like enormous walls of stone, sharp and quiet. Rashid parked near a viewpoint overlooking Wadi Hafit Cliff, one of the most breathtaking spots in the area. Few cars were around. A faint wind carried the sound of distant birds. It was beautiful and deadly. Kareem immediately pulled out his camera. He loved the way light hit the rocks, how the shadows changed every few minutes. He climbed a few meters up a slope, taking photos of the valley below. Rashid followed him slowly, scanning the surroundings. He noted the slippery rocks near the edge, the unstable ground, and how easy it would be for someone to lose their footing. The silence made his pulse louder. For a moment, a flicker of hesitation crossed his mind. He looked at his son's back, thin, focused, innocent. A part of him screamed to stop, to turn around, to drive home and pretend none of this was ever imagined. But then he thought of the investors, the humiliation, the ruined reputation. His name would be dragged through the mud. His family would lose everything. The thought of disgrace crushed every trace of guilt left in him. He told Kareem to pose near the edge so he could take a picture of him with the mountains in the background. Kareem laughed lightly, adjusting his jacket as he moved closer to the cliff. The rocks crunched softly under his shoes. Rashid raised the camera, pretending to focus the lens. His fingers trembled as they hovered near the shutter. Behind that calm face, his mind screamed in panic. This was the moment. A gust of wind passed. Rashid's pulse thundered. And then, in one swift motion, he stepped forward and pushed. There was a sharp cry, short, shocked. Then the sound of gravel scattering down the slope. The silence that followed was unbearable. Rashid's breath caught in his throat. He dared to look down. The figure of his son lay motionless several meters below, surrounded by dust and jagged rocks. Rashid's body shook, but his face remained empty. He stayed there for a few minutes, staring, unable to move. The echo of what he'd done hung heavy in the air. The world around him felt frozen, unreal. Finally, he turned away, walked back to the car, and sat behind the wheel. He checked his reflection in the rearview mirror, his face pale, eyes hollow. Then he started the engine and drove off slowly, leaving behind the sound of the wind brushing over the cliffs. As the road carried him back toward the city, Rashid tried to steady his breathing. He convinced himself it was over, that no one had seen him. It was a clean accident, a tragic fall. Soon the insurance money would come. He would rebuild his company, protect his wife, and carry on the illusion of success. He didn't look back, not once. But high above the cliffs, hidden in a metal box attached to a pole, a silent watcher was recording everything. A CCTV camera meant to monitor illegal off-road driving. It had captured the moment Rashid thought would disappear forever. The next morning began like any other in Dubai, the sky bright, the city alive. But for Rashid Al Nuaimi, everything felt hollow. He sat in his living room, pretending to be worried, pretending to be a father desperate for answers. His wife was in tears, pacing the floor. Kareem had not returned from their hiking trip. Rashid had already planned the story. He told Aisha that Kareem had slipped near the cliff, that he had searched for him for hours but couldn't find him. His voice trembled perfectly, every detail rehearsed. He claimed he had called for help, but there was no signal in the mountains. The story sounded tragic, yet believable. A father's nightmare. By midday, the police had been notified. Rashid drove back with officers to Hatta, where a small search team was already combing the rocky slopes near Wadi Hafit. Rashid watched quietly as drones and rescue dogs moved around the area. He kept his face calm, his hands folded, a mask of pain carefully fixed. Inside, his heart raced with a strange mix of fear and relief. Every part of the scene looked exactly as he had imagined it. When one of the rescuers shouted that they had found something, Rashid forced himself to look shocked. Kareem's body was discovered lodged between rocks several meters below the main cliff. His clothes were torn, his face bruised, and his camera shattered beside him. The rescue team lifted him carefully, and the supervising officer noted the steep angle of the fall. It looked accidental. Rashid's act of grief was convincing. His shaking hands, his whispered prayers. Everyone believed him. To the police, it was a tragic hiking accident. The terrain was known to be dangerous. No one questioned the story of a father who had just lost his only son. The report was filed. Rashid identified the body. The news reached the family home by evening, and mourners began to gather. Friends came offering condolences. The house was filled with quiet sobs and the smell of incense. Rashid accepted everyone's sympathy, repeating the same story over and over. Kareem had been taking photos, he slipped, and there was nothing anyone could do. He spoke in the same calm, broken tone, earning pity and admiration for his composure. Days passed. The funeral was held, the condolences faded, and Rashid resumed his routine. Outwardly, he seemed to be recovering, a man trying to stay strong after tragedy. But deep inside, his thoughts revolved around one thing: the insurance payout. He had already filed the claim, submitting the police report and death certificate. It was only a matter of time. He would finally be free from debt. But far away, inside a small control room at the Hatta Mountain Monitoring Station, something unexpected surfaced. A security operator named Omar Latif was reviewing surveillance footage from a camera placed near Wadi Hafit Cliff. The device was not meant for public safety. It was used to monitor off-road driving and prevent illegal dumping. Most of the time, it recorded nothing but dust and wind. Yet on the day of Kareem's fall, it had captured movement. Two figures near the edge of the cliff, one pushing the other. Omar watched the footage again and again, zooming in on the shapes. The video was grainy, but certain details stood out. A man wearing a white kandura, a younger figure with a backpack, a silver SUV parked nearby. He cross-checked the date and time with the report of the accident. It matched perfectly. The next morning, the footage was sent to the local police. Investigators watched in stunned silence as the truth unfolded on screen. The push was unmistakable. The motion, the fall, the way the man stood frozen for a moment before walking back to the car. It was all there. Though the image quality was poor, the silhouette, clothing, and vehicle were a direct match to Rashid Al Nuaimi. The police didn't move immediately. They wanted to be certain. They analyzed the footage frame by frame, matched Rashid's car registration, and studied his timeline from the day of the incident. Everything aligned. A quiet investigation began behind the scenes. Rashid had no idea. At the same time, the doctors treating Kareem made a startling discovery. When paramedics had brought his body in, they noticed faint signs of life. His pulse was weak, but present. The fall hadn't killed him instantly. He was in a coma, breathing through machines, his body broken but alive. The news didn't reach Rashid. The hospital listed him as critical and unidentified due to missing identification at the time. As Rashid waited impatiently for the insurance confirmation, the truth was already tightening around him like an invisible net. The footage existed, his son was alive, and the perfect lie he had built so carefully was about to crumble in the most unexpected way. The night before Rashid Al Nuaimi's arrest was strangely peaceful. He sat in his study, sipping tea, reviewing documents, and checking his phone for messages from the insurance company. His wife had finally stopped crying every night, her grief slowly turning into quiet acceptance. Rashid had played his role flawlessly, the grieving father who had lost everything. His performance had even earned him sympathy from the community. Friends visited him often, praising his strength. To everyone, he was a man surviving tragedy. To himself, he was on the edge of victory. What Rashid didn't know was that far away, inside the police headquarters in Hatta, officers were watching him closely. The CCTV footage had already been enhanced and verified. Investigators had matched the silver Range Rover seen in the video to Rashid's registration number. The timestamp aligned with his call to the authorities. The angle of the camera even captured the way he moved. Deliberate, steady, and cold. It was enough for suspicion to grow, but the police waited for something stronger before confronting him. They needed a witness, someone who could confirm the truth beyond doubt. That witness came unexpectedly. After 2 weeks in a coma, Kareem opened his eyes in a hospital bed. The fall had left him with multiple fractures and head injuries, but he was alive. His vision was blurry, his body weak, and his memories scattered. For hours, doctors spoke softly to him, checking if he could respond. He couldn't talk yet, but he could hear every word. Slowly, small fragments of that day began to return. The mountains, his father's face, the push. The memory hit him like a cold wave. The disbelief hurt more than the wounds. His father had tried to kill him. When the doctors realized he was conscious, they informed the police. 2 detectives arrived quietly, unsure how much the boy remembered. They showed him a notepad and asked gentle questions. Kareem's hands trembled as he tried to move. When one of them asked who had pushed him, he didn't speak. Instead, his fingers shakily drew the letter R on the white hospital sheet. Then, slowly, he formed another line, an A. The detective looked at his partner. It was enough. At dawn, 3 police vehicles surrounded Rashid's villa in Al-Barsha. The neighborhood was still asleep as officers entered silently through the gate. Rashid was at his desk when he heard the knock on the door. For a brief second, confusion crossed his face. Then panic. When they told him he was under arrest for suspicion of attempted murder, his composure shattered. He shouted, denied everything, demanded a lawyer. But as they showed him still frames from the CCTV footage, his voice faltered. He stared at the blurry image of himself standing near the cliff, his hand on Kareem's shoulder. The silence that followed was heavy. At the police station, Rashid tried to rebuild his mask. He said the video was edited, that it was all a misunderstanding. He claimed Kareem had slipped, that he had tried to grab him but failed. He spoke of grief, of love, of being a victim of technology. But investigators were patient. They showed him the recovered data from his phone. Searches for accidental deaths in mountains, life insurance accident clause, and Hatter Cliff viewpoints. They showed him deleted photos of the same location taken weeks earlier, proving he had visited before the trip. Piece by piece, his plan was exposed. Meanwhile, Kareem was slowly recovering. The physical pain was immense, but the emotional wound was far deeper. He remembered the moment his father smiled before the push, the calmness in his eyes. That image haunted him every time he closed his eyes. Yet he agreed to testify. He wanted the truth known, not just for himself, but to end the illusion of a perfect family that had fooled everyone. When Rashid saw his son alive for the first time in court, his face turned pale. He lowered his head, unable to meet Kareem's eyes. The weight of what he had done finally broke through the wall of pride that had kept him standing. His lies crumbled in the face of living proof. The son he had left for dead. Outside the courtroom, news of the case spread quickly. The story shocked Dubai. People who had once admired Rashid couldn't believe the headlines. A respected businessman, a father, accused of trying to kill his only child. The villa that once symbolized success was now surrounded by reporters. The perfect image had shattered completely. In the hospital, Kareem stared out the window, watching the city lights flicker. He thought about how fragile everything had been. Love, trust, family. His father had traded it all for money and pride. The scars on his body would heal, but the one left in his heart would never fade. He had survived, but the person he had once called father no longer existed. In the weeks that followed Rashid Al Nuaimi's arrest, Dubai's media was consumed by the shocking story. News outlets described it as one of the most disturbing betrayals the city had ever seen. The man once known for his calm nature and respectable image had been exposed as a murderer in disguise. Every new detail that surfaced painted a darker picture. The footage, the insurance documents, the phone records, everything pointed to one undeniable truth. Rashid had planned to kill his son for money. Inside the interrogation room, Rashid sat in silence. The walls felt smaller every day. He was no longer the powerful businessman who commanded attention. He was just another prisoner, stripped of dignity. The detectives who questioned him had stopped trying to provoke emotion. There was none left to show. He denied the accusations at first, insisting that Kareem's fall was a tragic accident. He said the video was unclear, that his movements were misunderstood. But every lie fell apart as more evidence surfaced. His phone's GPS showed he had visited the same cliff weeks before the incident. Messages recovered from his email revealed he had been researching how life insurance claims worked after accidental deaths. Even his bank records showed recent rejections from lenders, revealing the depth of his desperation. When confronted with these findings, Rashid broke his silence. His voice was calm but hollow. He confessed not out of guilt, but out of exhaustion. He said he never meant for it to go that far, that he only wanted to scare Kareem, to make it look like an accident. Yet even he couldn't hide from what the video showed. He admitted he was drowning in debt, that his pride couldn't handle the fall from luxury to disgrace. The insurance money, he said, was supposed to be a reset button for the family. He convinced himself that one moment of evil could fix years of failure. The trial began 3 months later. The courtroom was crowded with reporters, legal teams, and curious onlookers. Aisha sat in silence, her eyes red, her face pale. She had lost her husband long before the arrest. She just hadn't known it yet. When Kareem entered the courtroom, supported by crutches, the room fell silent. He was thinner, his face marked by faint scars, but his gaze was steady. He refused to look at Rashid. The judge asked him to confirm his statement. With quiet strength, Kareem described everything he remembered. The trip, the photos, the sudden push, and the brief moment when he saw his father's face before falling. His words were simple, but they carried a weight that filled the entire courtroom. When the CCTV footage was played, there was no sound, only the images. Rashid and Kareem standing near the cliff, the camera shaking slightly in the wind. Then, that one decisive motion. The room seemed to stop breathing. Even Rashid couldn't look at the screen. He stared down, his hands clenched, his eyes wet with the realization that there was no escaping the truth anymore. The verdict came swiftly. Rashid Al Nuaimi was sentenced to life imprisonment for attempted murder and insurance fraud. His business collapsed within weeks, and his name was erased from every partnership and company listing in Dubai. The villa in Al Barsha was sold to pay debts, its grand walls stripped of their shine. The family that had once been a symbol of wealth and elegance was gone, replaced by whispers of greed, betrayal, and loss. Kareem, though physically healing, carried an invisible burden. The betrayal of a father leaves a wound deeper than any scar. He spent months in therapy, learning how to live with what had happened. He stopped posting photos online and avoided the media completely. Yet in his silence, he found a strange kind of purpose. He began visiting schools to speak privately with students about resilience, grief, and survival, never revealing his own story, but always hinting at the danger of blind ambition. Years later, when a true crime documentary released the footage and the full story, viewers were horrified. The image of Rashid calmly walking away from the cliff became one of the most haunting moments ever captured by accident. The documentary revealed not just a crime, but a lesson that greed can destroy even the strongest blood ties, and that the pursuit of image can turn love into something monstrous. The final scene showed the cliff at sunrise, the same place where everything had happened. The wind moved through the rocks, the valley silent and endless. A voiceover described how the mountain had seen everything, recorded everything, and revealed the truth when no one else could. Rashid thought he had buried his crime beneath stone and silence, but the mountains, like truth itself, had refused to stay quiet. And so the story of Rashid and Kareem Al Nuaimi became more than a tragedy. It became a reminder that even in a city built on dreams and success, the darkest secrets will always find their way to the light.